remember once when we were sitting in the UN, you said, what we really need now is to have a massive group of people who are willing to support the whistleblowers, because when somebody has the courage to stand up and say, this is not right, very often they are terrifyingly alone and their lives get detonated and destroyed and they have no support.
Absolutely. I believe a lot of people of influence and in positions where they are heard and seen never really stand up for people who are whistleblowers or are making a difference and need their support. So I do believe the future champion is going to be that midwife, well, who's able to support others who are taking risk. And I've actually seen that happen. It's something we actively work with. So for me, it's vital that we are able to see that when we will change the rules of the game, there will be resistance. And that resistance need to be dealt with not as something bad, but as something inevitable.
Right.
And that we need to put in place strategies.
And
that
something useful, actually, that hones our skills and deepens our compassion.
Yeah, even little things like, when we start a new exercise regime, it's uncomfortable. So all change is uncomfortable. So we've got to work with that. So for me, the world of the people who are working in consciousness requires a massive engagement with actually having dignity for everyone manifest.
Absolutely.
And so for me, they've opened a door, and I think as long as they're not stuck on the mountaintop, I worked with...
stuck on the mountaintop,
yes,
I love that.
This is a quotation from Roshi Pat O'Hara here, and I worked with her for a while in New York, and she said, in my Sangha, people are often stuck on the mountaintop, Monica. How will they walk up and down? And so, how do we not get stuck on the mountaintop? She is so eloquent. So we did some work, and it was fascinating working with her, because I would bring in the distinctions of design, and she would bring in the Buddhist dimension that she had practiced. It was so beautiful. Anyway, we need to get not stuck on the mountaintop. I think that's really what that part is. As far as activism, the first thing is I think that they have an enormous amount of courage.
Oh, yes.
To stand up against stuff, lose what they have, be able to speak up and speak out, be criticized, be put down, be ridiculed. So I think that activists are very courageous. The part that I think is a little, that doesn't work both for them and for everyone else, I think the parts are, number one, a lot of them are angry, really angry. So anger in itself is just an emotion, right, Andrew? There's nothing wrong in anger. When anger is destructive, it doesn't work.
Yes.
But principled outrage is vital.
And how do you transform anger into principled outrage? And how do you transform the energy of anger, without repressing it, into fierce compassion energy?
So
that is the key, isn't it?
Those are some of the tools we use, for... tools is not the right word, because it's not a toolbox.
No.
But there are some distinctions.
Transmutations, alchemies.
Alchemies, yes. Some of the alchemies that transform my destructive anger into one of principled outrage, because that is vital, to be able to speak up, speak out, where the action is not okay, and yet be able to embrace every human being simply because they're human, or every sentient being simply because they're sentient. And so for me, the activist burnout is often the frustration that comes out of this not seeing change.
Yes.
And recognizing that no matter how long my life is or how short it is, every seed I sow that is deep will always remain. Somewhere it will be manifest. I think the knowing that when I source my actions as an activist from my principles and my sacred space, where I can embrace every human being, but I have the courage to say that what is being done is not okay, that's the transformation. And I believe the approaches we have, the alchemies that we have, will allow us to transcend activist burnout, retain their courage, their ability to see pattern, and yet source it from a space that's not exclusionary or hate-driven, but is from a space of inclusion and creative action.
And it's actually going to be immensely more effective, because we've seen what happens when someone or a group of people stands in their sacred space and acts out of it. We saw Gandhi unseat the British Empire in many ways through his amazing strategy and alchemy of non-violence. We've seen what happened in Poland when Lech Walesa organized a whole movement dedicated to principles of compassion and solidarność. We've seen what happened in South Africa when Mandela and de Klerk stood together and evolved a vision of reconciliation in extreme circumstances. We've seen what Aung San Suu Kyi has been able to achieve with all the flaws and difficulties of her actual practice. So this isn't a fantasy we're talking about. This is something that actually works in really very difficult situations, when people bring together the spiritual and the active and work with these profound alchemies in real situations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that all these movements did not have access to one thing. So if you look at Gandhi's non-violence, yes, we attained freedom. Would you call India today non-violent?
Oh
I'm
my
not
God,
so sure.
No.
So we are talking about sustained change.
Yes.
So sustained change requires not just the leader to practice that.
Yes.
It requires a set of approaches where everybody's engaged differently.
Yes. Well, our whole education of people has changed.
Yeah, and our whole engagement in societal processes, in social transformation and systems change is sourced this way. So for me, the big difference between all the movements that you've quoted, and I so admire every one of the people who've learned so much from what's happened and stood on their shoulders, is that I am fortunate enough to have access to a whole new range of processes that allows everybody to be engaged.
And this is your passion, to
this
engage
is my
everybody.
And
yes.
It doesn't require a PhD, and it doesn't require you to be a Nelson Mandela. So this work is more about the Rosa Parks than it is about the Gandhis
yes.
and Mandelas.
Yeah, it's not about the star, it's about the midwife, the humble midwife.
Yeah, and I think in those days that's the only way we could rally people.
Yes.
We were not connected. But today we are connected in a different way. How many millions stood up against war and just marched on the streets just a couple of years ago? That wouldn't have happened, 2 decades ago. So to me, there are huge openings. And as people of habit, we tend to feel that the system we've created is the only way, so let's tinker with it. But this is not about tinkering.
Well, one of the things that I love about what you say is your emphasis on a new vision of leadership. And I know you're working with members of the Occupy movement and working with them to help them evolve even further this vision of leadership that they gave us, really, saying we're not going to go with the old star leadership. We're going to empower all people to be leaders.
Yeah, I would use past tense because Andrew, I'm not working with them right now, but there was a time when they were active. I did work with them, and I worked with them because they invited me to share these tools to address activist burnout, to distinguish between tactic, strategy, and paradigm shift, to shift conversations for sustained change. So and I found that their exploration, they did some things. They spoke truth to power. Yeah. One of the spaces that I worked with them is that this is not about only 99%. It's about the greatness of 99% and 1%, right. And that the actions of the 1% may not be helping humanity, and that we need to address it. They began with a declaration of 16 points that they wanted to address, including animal rights and war and a whole lot of things. And I felt that the declaration was about results, and I felt that would be important. But I think the movement has morphed, and that it's become different. So I'm not working with them right now.